So again, this is ethics in computer programming and game design. And very briefly about myself, I currently teach philosophy as well as game studies at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. I also just took on the co-chair position for the SD Games and Simulation Network. Basically, it's a network of 2,500 educators from K-20 who are using video games and simulations to promote education. So obviously, I'm responsible for explaining how games fit into higher education because that's actually my specialty. I'm also currently the steering committee board member for International Game Developers Association, Learning Games and Education. So what I do over there is I talk to game developers and give them suggestions on how to make games actually fulfill a curriculum, right? So satisfy a curriculum. So those are little hats that I take. So after this presentation, the link to this slides will appear again, so you guys will have access to everything, okay? So I have a little table of content for a 1-hour presentation. So there's 5 parts to this presentation. First part is on current issues in technology. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of some of the landscape problems that we are confronting in technology. Current issues in game design, so just a few of them as we discuss them. Problems with recommended ethical codes. So indeed, I'm actually saying that 70+ organizations that currently are promoting ethical codes for computer science, ethical code for artificial intelligence, have problems. And I'm giving this big argument today. 4 is I'm going to present moral philosophy as response to those ethical codes. And then lastly is what programmers and game designers can do, okay? So first section, here's a quick overview of some of the problems in the tech industry. And for many of us who are experts in technology, I'm sure that you're well familiar with some of these issues, okay? So first one, let me define the term surveillance capitalism, which has become quite important in our discussion about the ethical behavior or unethical behavior of tech corporations, okay? So I'm going to read a quote from Shoshana Zuboff, who coined the term surveillance capitalism. So she says, I define surveillance capitalism as the unilateral claiming of private human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. These data are then computed and packaged as prediction products and sold into behavioral features markets. Business customers with a commercial interest in knowing what we will do now, soon, and later. Basically, our behavior on Facebook, our clicking behavior on Twitter, what we're doing on websites and so forth, those are behavioral data. And they're using that data and they're selling it so that other developers can make products out of it. That's what surveillance capitalism is about, is to survey people's behaviors. So surveillance capitalism, okay, I'm going to tell you that because most tech companies follow surveillance capitalism, they are confronting many ethical dilemmas because of it, okay? So ethical dilemmas are defined as decision-making problems that contain 2 or more moral imperatives. So moral imperative means you are compelled to do something because of moral rule, right? Moral imperatives that can lead to undesirable or even harmful outcomes. That means you have 2 or 3 or more options, and every option that you choose can lead to undesirable outcome. That's called an ethical dilemma. So tech companies are facing many ethical dilemmas in which enforcing corporate interests would transgress their moral responsibility to society. So when I say society, I'm talking about the greater society, the United States, for example. Society, on the loose definition, just means a group of people. So the greater society is the place that you live in, the people that you're responsible to. It could be state, it could be country. So in this section, I'm going to show you some series of current news. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way back to 2010. Some of you might know this stuff. So in 2010, Corporation Target was one of the first companies to use machine learning to track consumer behavior. So what they were doing, right, to maximize their return on investment there, is that they were tracking what the customers are buying. They tracked the frequency of them buying a particular item. They track when they go, how long they take before they purchase again. That's what we mean by tracking consumer behavior. What was creepy was that Target also figured out, for example, when a woman is going to be pregnant. That is because they can track when she buys, sanitary napkins, when she buys items that's related to, ovulation. So it's a very invasive way of marketing. Why is that invasive? You go, well, they have the data. There's no one that guarantee that data would be private. That means there are hackers can hack into Target's database, and certainly they're not that well protected, and they can steal all that data, and that has information of the person, their ovulation period, what they're purchasing, and so forth. And this is way back in 2010. Creepy stuff. So author Eric Siegel, the author of Predictive Analytics, The Power to Predict Who Will Click, Buy, Like, and Die. This book, which was published in 2013, is often assigned in computer science, ethics of computer science courses, okay? And what he pointed out was regarding the Target pregnancy problem. He says, imagine that the pregnant woman's job is shaky and her state disability isn't set up right yet. To have disclosure could risk the retail cost of a birth, approximately $20,000. Disability payments during time off, approximately $10,000 to $50,000, and even her job. Women who are applying for jobs know that they don't really want to mention that they're pregnant, because if they do, sometimes discrimination happens. Employers don't want to pay for additional costs in health insurance, right? But if Target is tracking this information, and maybe they're selling it because they pretty darn do, they sell this information, that means there's disclosure, and the woman's rights are basically being violated. Okay, now we move on. We move on to more problems with digital marketing. So on the left-hand side is a research that's done by University of Cambridge back in 2013. So we're progressing here. And what they found out back in the day is that digital records of a person can expose intimate details and personality traits of millions. Now you might say, well, okay, we're used to it, so what? Personality traits include such things as race and ethnicity. So that means that advertisers can actually discriminate and market things based on race, which is very insulting, honestly. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's the Harvard Gazette. So Harvard University put out a statement regarding the problems with advertising, right, with digital advertising. And on the very short quote, it says, at the end of the day, online advertising is about discrimination. You don't want mothers with newborns getting ads for fishing rods, and you don't want fishermen getting ads for diapers. The question is, when does that discrimination cross the line from targeting customers to negatively impacting an entire group of people? That is certainly a valid question. Should we do that? You can, but should you do that? Now, moving on, I'm moving quickly ahead from 2010 to 2012, all the way to 2018. So Google has been doing this for a while, but in 2018, there was a big expose written by Think Progress. They basically figured out that Google was creating this project called Dragonfly. And what exactly is Dragonfly? When Google went to China and tried to present the Google search engine to China because they want to break into the China market, China says, we don't want google.com because you don't censor anything, and we need you to censor everything that's negative about China. Anything that goes against our political interest. For example, we don't think Taiwan is a country, it belongs to us. So you cannot have any report that Taiwan, it suggests Taiwan's possibly a country. Or Tibet, right? Tibet's not a country, it's not, So Google actually said, okay, we'll make you a different version of Google, and we're gonna call it Google Dragonfly. And this Dragonfly will censor anything you want. So Think Progress figured this out and go, my goodness, this is such a violation of human rights. Now, how is that a violation of human rights? Imagine a dictatorship, and I'm sure you guys can imagine this, where our information is given to us based on how the dictator wants to control us. If Google can do that for China, no doubt they can do that to the United States, right? So the employees of Google in 2019, so this is a report in 2018. In 2019, the employees of Google did massive protests all over the place. The employees of Google directly said, we don't think this is right. How can you possibly create a web when we've been talking about open web and equality and justice and do no evil? How can you possibly do this? So there were protests all over the country because of it. So progressing to 2019, Google Project Dragonfly has been terminated because US Congress pressured Google to stop it, right? So BBC reported this with very much confidence. However, notice on 2019, so this was July 17th, and I know the text is kind of small. So on July 17th, they reported this, but March 4th, a few months before BBC dropped the news, the Google employees did an interview with Verge, and they said to Verge, we're not sure if Google actually stopped that product because it could be named something else, and we're monitoring every day if they actually stopped it. We asked them to stop. We as employees are we are the backbone of this company. We don't believe that we should be contributing a product that does evil. So that's actually what happened there, but we don't know if it's completely gone. Now, I egged on Google. Now I'm going to talk about Facebook a little bit. So in 2019, Cory Doctorow, the famous science fiction writer and professor, wrote an expose talking about Facebook's Project Atlas. So what Project Atlas was an application that Facebook offered to teenagers, young teens, like 10 to 18, around that age? And, 13 to 18, sorry. So what they said to the teens was, okay, install this app on your phone, right? And we will give you $20. Now, these teens had no idea what they were installing. They thought it was a VPN application. But what we found out, right, and it's called Facebook Research. That's what the app is called, Facebook Research. What we found out is actually tracking every single thing that the teenagers are doing openly, because the teens were being tricked into sharing everything that they are doing. They thought it was a VPN. They thought that their tracks were covered. They thought that everything they're doing is private. It wasn't a VPN. It was basically a direct connection to Facebook. This was horrible when it was exposed. Okay. Now we're moving from Facebook, because I'm going to talk about a lot of little companies here, because I'm not going to accuse just one company. You just have to see how widespread this problem is. So this started several years ago. We knew about what Palantir was doing like in 2018. But this part, I'm taking two articles in recent time to tell you what the progress is. So Palantir, if you folks didn't know, is a data analytics company. And what they did was they collaborated with the US government and particularly ICE to track immigrants. So what their software was doing was they were able to form connection between children and adults and all the familiar connections, so that, and also where they live, where they went, and so forth, like with tracking devices and so forth, and drones. And ICE agents were able to use Palantir's information to arrest immigrants all over the place. Now, later on, the separation of children, right, the children from their parents, and also the loss of 6,000 plus children, that was also because of Palantir. So here's the thing. Palantir, September 4th of this year, just filed to go public. Last year, they made 1.5, and I can't remember the exact number there, but they made 1.5 billion dollars of their software. And what they do is they sell the software to countries, to nations around the world, so that they can track their own citizens, right? So finally, well, first of all, the employees in 2019, same thing, okay? In 2019, the Palantir employees figured out what Palantir was doing, and they felt that there was an injustice. They're saying, are you telling us that we're creating a software to help you separate children from their parents? Is that what we are doing right now? Does asylum seeking mean nothing to you? So employees, again, massive protests. And again, I'm only giving you one article, but if you search for, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles regarding protests. Okay, so this is not a small event by any means. So moving on from Palantir. So they had some bad bad promo, bad advertisements. So they try to get themselves off the spotlight. Excuse me, I drink a glass of water. So we think that Palantir got defeated because the CEO of Palantir finally admitted this year in January that, okay, fine, we were responsible for separating children from their parents. He finally admitted this in January of this year, right? So they kind of faded away. And I have to tell you that the employees of Palantir, a lot of them quit en masse. They just quit. They said, we can't do this. But the problem was, well, when the employees of Palantir tried to apply for jobs at other companies, a lot of them got rejected because those companies said, we don't want anything to do with you. The public perception of Palantir is terrible. So we don't want any association with you, right? So the employees obviously got affected by the company that they work for. Now in 2020, and on the bottom, if you guys can see that, this is from November 17th, 2020, okay? Now, Palantir didn't work, bad publicity, right? So now ICE is contacting Microsoft and Amazon, oh no, to use their cloud technology to track immigrants again. This is not ending. This is a cycle. The Palantir employee got punished, but now we have Amazon and Microsoft, so they're continuing the cycle right now. Okay. What else? So I talked about Amazon, those companies. Google also got in the act. So Google has a Google Cloud, right? That's a service very much like Microsoft Azure, right? But this is Google Cloud. And what Google Clouds will do, right, for the government is that they will create a virtual border wall. So what they're doing is they're going to set up data points to monitor the border. They will have drones flying there, and they will track all this data and give it to the government. Obviously, there's a lot of problem with this. Basically, surveillance on massive scale. And people who are not immigrants or who are being surveyed too, the neighbors who live near the border going, what's going on, right? I'm a U.S. citizen. Why are you flying your drones all over my house? This is a problem. Okay, so let's jump to Twitter. Everyone is going to get egged on today. Twitter. All right. So there's a particular company called Data Miner. So Data Miner is a third-party company that calls itself a partner to Twitter. So it's not Twitter, but it's a company that builds its technology to work with Twitter. And basically what they were doing was they were grabbing data from Twitter so that they can identify the protesters, for example, at Black Lives Matter or any of the protests around the country or the women's movement. And what they did was they gave that information to ICE agents and local police so that local police can arrest them. So part of in Portland, Oregon, the protesters were confused. The peaceful protesters were confused and going, why are we getting arrested so easily? What's going on? Basically, Data Miner handed that information directly to Oregon local police and say, Portland police and say, go arrest them. They live here. This is how many children they have. Here are the people that they're associated with. Here are their neighbors. A lot of people got arrested for wrongful reasons. Okay. They didn't end there. Data Miner, this was reported in October 2020. So now they're going to target communities of color for the police. So the police want to be able to track where all the African Americans are, where all the Mexican Americans are, so that they can arrest them easier. Tell me again that this is not ethical problems. Tell me again that we shouldn't care, because certainly the tech industry is not free from blame here. Tech industry is implicit in a lot of the problem that we have today. Okay. So the downer continues, I'm sorry. So talking about Twitter. So Twitter in recent months, as I think folks, if you been reading the news, you know that Twitter has been trying to do the right thing by labeling tweets, right? So say that tweet is factual or not factual. They try to link to information and so forth. So they've been trying to monitor their tweets better. But here is an example of a problem of unequal application of their own policy. So a lot of Twitter users complained that they were being sexually harassed or on Twitter, or that there are people threatening violence, right? To say, "We'll kill you," that the crazy rhetoric that happens on Twitter. So in December of 2017, Twitter wrote a new policy that particularly about violence and physical harm, that if you tweet anything about violence and physical harm, we will eliminate your Twitter account, right, and ban you from the platform. But if you see in that orange, folks, do you see where it says, this policy does not apply to military or government entities? That is a demonstration of unethical, unequal application of a policy. The user should not be distinguished or somehow that there's one type of users that's being championed over other users. The policy should be blanket state, which is if a politician threatens violence and say they want to kill somebody, that account should be stopped, right? But Twitter added this provision, which means that this is actually not fair. Who said that their ethical rule is actually ethical? Okay. This this is depressing me today, okay? And I just found this out. So DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, in November, the Intercept found this out, that DHS now plan to collect eye scans and DNA from us citizens. And they're going to hire a bunch of defense contractors, which is people in the tech industry who will help create software for DHS to do this. Now, here's the deal. If you don't understand the magnitude of this problem, and it's not just immigrants, if you don't care about everybody else, it's a collection of everything, right? I'm sorry that there's pounding sound in the background. I'm sorry. Sorry, there's some sounds from neighbors there. But essentially, if someone can collect your DNA, right? DNA data can reveal a lot of things about you. For example, your health condition. So using the health condition, they can actually eliminate or, boy, I'm so sorry about the background sound.
We can't hear it, Sherry.
So okay, good. I'll keep talking. I'm sorry. There's some sounds in the background there. So what I was saying is that if the government can collect DNA data from you, the DNA data can be used against you, because if you have health conditions, you can be denied health insurance. If a company found out your DNA data, they can decide not to hire you. I mean, we already have the problem of ageism, where companies are, targeting folks who are older and just discriminating against them. Imagine that the government can actually get that data and share it with other companies. I mean, this is massive scale invasion of privacy. Okay, this is the latest news, and I'll end it here. So yesterday, I don't know if you guys saw the notice. 48 attorney generals and the Federal Trade Commission is suing Facebook en masse, alleging that Facebook is doing illegal monopolization. So what Facebook was doing was they acquired Instagram and they acquired WhatsApp, right? So what they were doing was acquiring those different kind of applications. It's not to provide better service for the users, but because those platforms contain lots of private information of its users. So because they can get all that data, they can sell it and make more applications, you see? And part of the whole thing, Facebook also owns Oculus Rift. So with all this information, right, they can promote and sell Oculus Rift and create certain kind of simulation specifically for each end user problem. These are lots of problems. Now, I don't know if progress will come about, but certainly this is the first lawsuit I see that it's at the scale that it is that might break up digital monopolies. This is the first time we're seeing at this scale. So things are coming. Companies are not going to be unscathed. So I talked a lot about issues in the tech industry. Now I'm going to talk about issues in the game design industry, okay? So you go, well, game design, what's the big deal, right? Now, lots of game designers have discovered and argued that some of the game design practices that we see out there are basically dark patterns. So here's a definition of dark patterns that's provided by Professors Zegal, Bjork, and Lewis, and this was in their paper, Dark Patterns in the Design of Games, published in 2013. This was an influential paper, okay? So what they define dark pattern is specifically for game design, is a dark game design pattern is a pattern used intentionally by a game creator to cause negative experiences for players that are against their best interests and happen without their consent. So here are two keywords: best interest of the user and consent, basically ignoring both. So if you're designing a game and you offend both, right, that's a dark pattern. So I'm going to give you an example, okay? For some of us who are not gamers, it's perfectly okay. Here's a game. This game is called Empires and Puzzles. For several years in a row, this was the #1 mobile application, mobile game on Google Play and also on Apple Store, right? So you can see in the screenshots that you can collect heroes. You can, those little hero cards, like you're collecting cards. You can raid other people, okay? You can also play those puzzle games, which are matching gems, right? So that's the premise of this game. But notice this, there's been an evaluation. Now, right there, if you guys can see, that's really tiny. But this site that evaluates dark patterns says that users have submitted, and we discovered there's 57 temporal dark patterns alone. So what exactly is a temporal dark pattern? Temporal means time. So dark pattern that take advantage of the user's time, right? So here's some example without reading everything. So for example, daily awards. So rewards, which is encourages that the user return every day. And if you don't return every day, it will punish you in some way, right? So that's called the daily rewards. Now, also infinite treadmill is the concept that it's impossible to win or complete the game. So you have to play forever. And lastly, let's see here. This can't pause or save, which is the game does not allow you to stop playing whenever you want, right? So those are the particular dark patterns that they see in Empires and Puzzles, okay? Now here's another game that many people should know about. This is Pokemon Go. So Pokemon Go is an alternative reality game. So what exactly is an AR game? AR game is an application that you install on your phone, right? Here's my mobile phone, and you can go out there and you play with the physical environment. So you will walk around your phone, and all of a sudden, right, Pikachu shows up on your phone. You go, oh my God, Pikachu shows up on Kofax and Ninth, whatever. I go catch Pokemon. So it's actually location sensitive in that it's mapped to Google Map locations. So if you walk to a particular street, a monster will appear on your phone, right? So you catch it. So that's the concept of an AR game, at least through a mobile phone, mobile device. So you can see that you can catch Pokemon monsters, right? You can raid with friends. So there's a friend element in this game. And also you can challenge your friends in battle. That means when we say friends, it's not me sitting in front of a computer and my friend sitting in front of a computer. That means I might be on Colorado Boulevard and my friend might be in another segment of Colorado Boulevard, and we're trying to battle each other in the physical environment where we hold our phones. Okay? So we talk a little bit about temporal dark patterns. Now we're going to talk about monetary dark patterns, and users reported, and they have discovered there's 553 monetary dark patterns. So not reading all of it, okay? But let me just jump to a few of them. So for example, pay to skip is the idea of you're spending money to avoid waiting for a time. So maybe the game will say, oh, you use up your 3 turns, okay, to get monsters. Now you got to pay, if you want to speed up the time, because it's going to take you 24 hours to get the next 3 turns, you can pay us $50, whatever, right? So you have to pay in order to speed up the time. Or for example, gambling and loot boxes. So you're spending real money to play a game of chance for a reward. So a lot of the game mechanics is random, and that you randomly pull monsters. So people are willing to spend a lot of money to gamble on the fact that they want a Pikachu, or they want whatever it is. I can't think of all the monster names right now. And they would pay money to pull. But why is that unethical? Why is that a problem? Children are playing this. That's gambling behavior. If you don't care about ethics, then obviously you don't care about getting children to gamble at a very young age. Okay? We're actually training them to gamble, right? Recurring fee. So for example, encourages player to play as much as possible to get their money's worth. So they keep playing because they feel like they get their money's worth somehow. So these are the examples of monetary dark patterns. And after we do this presentation, again, links to all these sites will be available. So if you want to study this and scare yourself, by all means, please do that. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit about problems with the recommended ethical code. So what I mean by recommended ethical codes are codes that are recommended by 70 plus organizations right now in the world that says, follow our guideline, follow our principles, because these are the things that you need to do as a computer scientist. These are the things you need to do as an artificial intelligence scientist, so on and so forth. Or this is what you need to do as an engineer, okay? I'm going to tell you that those guidelines and frameworks can still promote unethical behaviors, okay? So I am borrowing from Luciano Floridi. So Luciano Floridi is a very famous philosopher of technology. He is a professor at the University of Oxford, and I'm going to borrow from his framework to kind of explain what's going on. So according to Professor Floridi, current ethical frameworks can lead to 5 ethical gerunds. So it's okay if you don't understand gerunds, but essentially 5 problems, if you will, 5 areas of problems. So he lists these as the following, right? Ethics shopping, ethics blue washing, ethics lobbying, ethics dumping, ethics shirking. So I'll explain what each of them are as we continue to present. So first of all, what exactly is ethics shopping? So ethics shopping, without reading all that, ethics shopping is the idea that you're shopping around for code here and a code there and a code from wherever organization so that you can compose a set of codes that will benefit your company. So the problem with that is ethical codes are written as a system. So ethics is a system and the codes are consistent with the system in which it was built. But what they're doing is cherry picking, if you will. I don't like that ethic, but I like this code. So they put that together and that's called ethics shopping, which is inconsistent and illogical. Ethics blue washing is the idea that you present your company as an ethical company. So you state on the website, I'll give you an example, okay? Let's say my company sells diapers, okay? So I sell baby products and diapers. And I say on my site, all proceeds we will donate 20% of all proceeds to Doctors Without Borders because we need Doctors Without Borders to help save children overseas. Okay, sounds great. Here's the problem. Most consumers don't know how to fact check that. See, a company say whatever they want on the front of the page, but most consumers do not fact check. That is called ethics blue washing, which is making yourself sound ethical for the purpose of promoting your corporate interest. Okay, so ethics lobbying. So what is that? So in order to promote your agenda, you use the justification that it is ethical, whatever that means, right? It is ethical to promote some kind of legislation. So you go to Washington, D.C. and say, you must do this because this is the right thing to do. The problem is it's actually for corporate interest and not specifically for the purpose of making society better. Now, I realize that I couldn't give you, because we're trying to squeeze all this into 1 hour, I can't give you very specific examples, but if you look at the link, Professor Floridi has lots of examples to help us understand how each of these work. Okay, ethics dumping is the idea that, okay, well, let me say it this way. So it's the idea that you follow a set of ethical codes. So your company says, we follow all these ethical codes in this company. Okay, we do all the right thing. But then what they do is they go to China, they go to Vietnam, they go to Australia and other countries, and they do completely opposite to what they're doing in the United States. So it's dumping, right? So they're basically doing the opposite overseas because people can't see it, okay? So who is responsible? Well, we already saw an example, Google. Google says, we won't do evil. We care about human rights. We care about transparency. We don't want to censor anybody. And then they go on and they do that, exactly that, when they create products for countries that cares about censorship, that actually think censorship is okay. Okay. Last one, ethics shirking. Ethics shirking is the idea that, okay, you know all the ethical codes, but you decided to just ignore them because whatever the issue is too far away for you to care. So here's an example. Without naming all the company involved, I did not mention this news event, but we know that China has, put 1 million plus Uyghurs in concentration camps. okay? And what they were doing was they borrowed technology, and basically there's a bunch of Silicon Valley companies that help China set up all the surveillance camera in China so that they can track where all the Uyghurs are. There's facial recognition software that try to check the size of a Uyghur's face compared to a Chinese person's face, which is really inaccurate. But they're using the facial recognition software to go, there's a Uyghur, put him in prison. And there's another Uyghur, put them in prison. Concentration camp, right? So let's say you work for, let's say a person work for a company that develop a software to help put Uyghurs into concentration camps. And they say, well, China's really far away from me. I live in California, doesn't matter. That's called ethics shirking, which is because it's far away, I have no ethical responsibility. That's obviously not true. So how do we respond to some of these issues today? So I brought a lot of issues to discuss, right? But I'm going to make it really simple because, again, I only have 1 hour. So I'm going to make it really simple for us to understand. My proposal is that instead of just teaching people ethics, and what most classes that teach ethics does this thing, which is they go, here's a case study, here's a situation, and then they get students to discuss and go, what do you think? Is it right? Is it wrong? And so forth. That kind of education has its purpose, but most students have no idea why something is an ethical code. Moral philosophy is the discussion of why something should become code. The why is missing in this conversation, so many students have no idea. They thought that ethics is just remembering a bunch of codes. In fact, when I talk to computer science students, many of them think that that's what ethics is. It's basically somebody telling them what to do, and there's a bunch of rules they need to remember. They have no idea why they have to remember all these. They just know that somebody's telling them to remember it. So my proposal is that computer science should include a healthy study of moral philosophy to balance out the understanding of ethical codes that needs to exist in technology. Okay, so let's discuss the first theory. Okay, there's a particular philosophical theory called cultural relativism. So cultural relativism is the argument that different cultures have different moral codes. So therefore, we cannot critique moral codes of other cultures because it's, cultural domination or disrespecting other culture or racism. That's the argument anyway, right? So say, oh, other culture and moral codes, we can't argue that. It's relative to their culture. Philosopher James Rachels, okay, argues something very different. He says, wait a second, moral values. So the word value means what you think is the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, right? So he says, moral values are actually based or formed on the social condition in which you live in, right? So for example, I'm going to give you an example. So in certain parts of Africa, okay, certain countries in Africa, female genital mutilation, right, FGM is still very much practiced. In fact, some parts of Singapore still practices it, okay? What are the reasons why they think this is a moral thing to do, okay? Some of them believe that, well, rape happens everywhere, so therefore we don't want our children to be raped, so it's okay to mutilate their genitals. The other thing is that they have a very strong association that marriage and virginity has to go hand in hand. So in order to make sure that a female stays as a virgin, we need to mutilate her genitals so she feels no sexual sensations whatsoever. Now, those are the conditions. What we mean by conditions, social conditions that drove them to think that certain moral rules are okay. Now, you might say religion, where religion would be part of that social condition. So what Rachel's argue is instead of saying, well, that's their belief and that's their culture, we can't talk about that. He said, no, we need to examine the conditions, otherwise, or limitations by which certain moral values are formed, which is what are the conditions that drove certain moral values to be formed in the first place, right? And then consider how we can help lift some of those conditions, right, to make room for moral progress. So does it require education? Probably, right? So in a certain country that has received sexual education, right, sex ed, some of the thinking regarding female genital mutilation has shifted because they got education on why that's a bad thing to do, why it creates an infection, why it can kill children. Okay, so I'm moving on. So here's the second theory. So I think most of us know Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Friedrich Nietzsche has a whole problem with the word morality itself. So let's explain that for a bit. So Nietzsche believes that morality is actually a political thing, that it's actually in itself political because morality is created or used by the masters. So I want to be careful in defining these terms because masters is not what our modern understanding of master is. So the way Nietzsche defined master is those who are beyond morality, which is those who don't believe in morality, don't follow morality. They're beyond morality. Okay. Master to control the slave. So not our modern understanding of slaves. Okay. But he defines slave as those who follow moral rules. So if I follow moral rules, I fall under the category of slave, according to Nietzsche. Okay, so for him, all morality is political in nature because what is politics? Methods by which one satisfies the interests of a group. That's actually what politics is. So therefore, if morality promotes a specific interest of one group, then therefore it's problematic. But I don't want to rest on this idea. Many people misread Nietzsche. They think that when he opened up this can of worms, that he's promoting nihilism, which is nothing matters, morality doesn't matter, right? That's what a lot of people fall under. Actually, I'm not telling you guys to think of it that way. What I'm going to say is in the yellow part is that what Nietzsche basically is teaching us is that we should recognize the ethical codes, which are, in other words, applied moral rules, right? So moral rules, when it gets applied to a society as a whole, that becomes an ethical code, okay? So that ethical codes are fallible, which is they're not set in stone, and that as a society, we need to constantly examine them and re-examine them to figure out if ethical are still just, given the social conditions have changed, right? Things have improved. Are the ethical we follow still okay, right? So ethical code should not be set in stone or seen as set in stone. Okay, now third theory. And specifically, the question is why cultivating moral virtues is important. So I'm going to bring back a good old Greek philosopher, Aristotle. So Aristotle argues that we can live the good life, right? So everyone wants a good life. So he tried to define what good life is for us. And he argues that in order for a person to have a good life, they need to cultivate two kinds of virtues. Okay. The first virtue is called intellectual virtue. So intellectual virtue, the word virtue, think of it as excellence. Okay, some kind of excellence, right? So intellectual virtue is you can obtain that through study, which is you learn, you study, you obtain knowledge, and then also through your life experiences. So the combination of the two develop your intellectual virtue. The second type of virtue is moral virtue, which is the habit of making good choices. So habit of making good choices means you have to regularly make good choices. All right. So now let's go back to what virtue actually is. So for Aristotle, virtue is a state in which one makes deliberate choices. And I want to emphasize the word deliberate. Deliberate means you're not just making random choices and hope something sticks. You are conscious of why you make that particular choice. You understand the consequence of the choice that you make. That's called deliberate choice. That avoids the extremes between traits. So I gave you some example of traits are like courage, pride, generosity, etc. So what do we mean by not making choices that goes to extreme end, either end of a trait? So for example, courage. Many people think that courage is a virtue, right? So be courageous is a good thing. But let me give you an example when courage is not ethical, okay? So an extreme version. So let's say I am a soldier with a platoon of my platoon and many of them got injured. So there's only like 5 of us still standing, right? There's enemy approaching, and the enemy, there's like 300 enemies coming towards us, okay? So I decided, well, I'm gonna be courageous because courage is a virtue. So I decided to just jump in war and try to attack the 300 soldiers. Obviously, that's stupidity, right? So Aristotle said that's silly. That's ridiculous, right? That's not, you can't think of a courage as a virtue. It's actually a trait. And you develop the trait, but you try to figure out what exactly it's extreme. Is it where's the middle of that to develop what exactly is good, okay? So lastly, he argues, and this is a big argument, that justice in any society is achieved by practicing the virtues of the following, right? Learning, constant obtaining of knowledge, making good judgments, taking actions based on good judgment. So Aristotle cautions us. He says, it's not good enough that you make judgments. You also have to take action. So you can't be someone who's constantly saying, this is the right thing to do and not do anything. He said, you actually need to make action to make the right judgment, right? And also, all of this practice must be done in relation to others in a community. So he says, your virtue is worthless unless if your virtue is in consideration of how your behavior relate to or affect other people. It's basically you have a responsibility to other people to make yourself virtuous, right? That's exactly, I'm sorry, there's work in the background. I think someone's doing some construction, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so last bit, and I think, I'm a little bit close to time here. So here's the last section. What can programmers and game designers do? I mean, I went over a lot of stuff. I try to cram as much as possible an hour. So what can we do when the tech industry, and I want to say the entire tech industry, of course not, but some tech promotes inequality, injustice, and harm. So what are we supposed to do? Here are some answers, okay? And I am just promoting possible answers. Of course, you folks can probably think of some yourself. So one of the things that we know from engineers often study is that one of the ethical codes that engineers need to follow is loyalty to one's employer, loyalties to one's company. And it makes sense that that's an ethical code because, you know, you want to protect the company's interests so that the company doesn't get taken advantage of by other companies, right? So that makes sense. However, one's loyalty to one's company, and I'm going to parentheses it, culture, because the definition of culture is a way of life, and a company is a way of life, right? So one's loyalty to one's company or culture is important, but one's responsibility to the greater society, so in which a company operates, so the United States, a company operates in a state or in the entire United States, right, can supersede one's loyalty to a company, especially, right, when the company's interests can harm society. So we all must remember, we are supposed to be loyal to our company to protect the company. But when we realize that the company is actually doing harm to society, we actually have a moral responsibility, ethical responsibility, right, to not continue doing what it is that they're doing because we're actually hurting other people, okay? So cultural ethical codes, so a culture's ethical codes, and we bring back to Rachel's, right? So to James Rachel's, he says that cultural relativism should not stand, that we should be able to examine cultures. We should be examining culture's ethical codes. Well, a company is a culture, and we should be able to examine it. It's not set in stone, right? Second part, design and develop products and form companies in consideration of the community. Once again, it's this word community that hovers. Many people misunderstand what ethics is. They think ethics is some weird thing that promotes one's interests. Like if I do good thing come to me. That's not what ethics is. Ethics is a bunch of moral codes that's applied to the society as a whole to ensure that society survives. That's the whole point of ethical codes. In fact, ethical codes, some of them become law. That's what laws are. But the difference between ethical codes and law is that law include a possible punishment. Ethical codes are respecting that people will follow them because it's the right thing to do. You see that? So, and ethics is always about other people. It's not about, I'm a good person because I studied this. Aristotle will say, I don't care how much you study. You didn't affect an experience. You didn't do anything for anybody. That doesn't make you virtuous at all. So he said there's a lot of things you have to do to make yourself virtuous. So I'm going to say that profit with ethics is possible. I kind of ran out of time to list companies that makes a good amount of money doing good things for the community. But if we have time, we probably talk about it. And then lastly is use collective protest. So the word collective is not protest by yourself and get yourself in trouble, right? But in a group of people, as you can see with Palantir, Google, Facebook, all those employees in mass, right? Protest because I think something is wrong and the company needs to change. Now, to promote justice and uphold fellow citizens' digital rights. So I put a link, a bunch of them, because we can't show every one of them, but those are the big entities. For example, Digital Protest Movement is written by a journalist who is tracking every single protest movement in the United States. So that's a very important site to look at. EFS, most people know what that is. Open Democracy is about trying to promote democracy. EDRI is an entity that basically promotes the digital rights of European citizens. And if your company operates in Europe, you should probably keep track of what they're promoting, okay? Access Now, CocoaNet is also in Europe. Change.org, I think we know what that is, right? So petition and ask for change. And Avaz is also similar. So those are possible sites for you to see, and they actually tell you what movements are, how to collect and protect yourself, as well as what you can do to help save your company from making the wrong decision. There's more recommendations, okay? So you can certainly, as a developer, join the movement to create open access and transparent web. So what do we mean by that? Open access has been around for a while, but it's gaining traction lately, okay? You as a developer, okay, can actually join these movement and make very good money because there's actually lots and lots and lots of jobs now that promotes open access, right? Particularly, here's an example. Blockchain is not the only people, but blockchain developers are actively developing open access software and application to IPFS. So IPFS stands for Interplanetary File System. An interplanetary file system will soon replace HTTP. So all the website that we know of will disappear, guys. Those linking things will disappear. We will not be using HTTP anymore. We will be using IPFS. And I'm not going to go too much into the technology, but basically, if everything is developed on IPFS, we will soon create a second version of Internet, which is Internet 2.0. Okay. Also, organization like Mozilla, the people who make Firefox, has released a Mozilla manifesto of 10 principles of how to promote an open web that respects the digital rights of users. So I'm going to leave this piece here. We're not reading all of it. I just take screen captures, and all the images are linked. So if you guys click on the images, you'll see all the sites. Okay. So Mozilla, let's read a couple of them. So it says, principle 1, the internet is an integral part of modern life, a key component in education, communication, collaboration, business, entertainment, and society as a whole. Okay, so I think most of us can agree, if not everybody, that pretty much internet is part of all of our lives. I mean, I'm constantly looking at my phone. I only watch television. I mean, I only watch YouTube videos now. I don't even have TV. Everything is internet, right? So it's every part of our life. Unless you live in a dictatorship like North Korea that doesn't have internet access, I think most of us, the globe, uses internet, okay? And because that principle stands, they argue that internet should be a global public resource because everyone's using it. It's like water. So we should actually protect it, and therefore it should be open and accessible. It should not be monetized. It should be open, right? Or it can be monetized, but it needs to be open and transparent. Let me rephrase it that way, okay? So moving down, principle 5, individuals must have the ability to shape the internet and their own experience on it. So are you selling my data? Can I know about it? Can you be transparent? I don't like you doing that with my stuff. I don't like your interface. Can I say something? That is principle number 5. That's hard to achieve, but that's what Mozilla is trying to do, right? And also, if we go down all the way to principle 10, magnifying the public benefit aspect of the internet is an important goal worthy of time, attention, and commitment. So the word public is repeated, the word community is repeated. They're basically saying the same thing that philosophers have been saying. You need to think about your community. It's not just about yourself. You live in a society. I drink water. It comes from the public water system. I didn't make that water, right? When I go into a road, somebody paved it. I didn't pave that road. When I use the restroom, right? The system is all based on other people's construction. I have a lamp before me. I don't know how to make a lamp. Somebody else made it. I live in a society. I am not delusional. So if we live in a society and we are benefiting from other people's work, including, for example, this glass of water, I didn't make this. I have no technical skills, man. I don't know how to make this thing. I'm part of society. You can be in denial, make weird arguments, but I belong in society. I have a responsibility to my fellow people, and I should not do something to harm them. Whether you're in tech industry or other industry, like for example, I teach game design, you shouldn't be doing things to harm other people. That's the basic principle. So I'm gonna stop here. In the link today is bit.ly/technology ethics 2020. So you can access all the links. In fact, I highly recommend that you look at some of the books. Maybe it's useful for your classroom and for people that you know. Everything I do is OA. I'm a big open access advocate. Everything I do is open educational resources. So please feel free to grab the slides if you like. So I'm done.